Hello, everyone. My name is Nate Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Proving Ground. I'll be leading the workshop today and talking about our Semantic toolkit, which is a plugin for Rhino that allows for data assignment and property management with Rhino objects. And I'll also be talking a bit about the Power BI component to this as well, wherein you're able to then take your Rhino models and visualize them in a business intelligence environment, correlate them with other data, and derive interactive dashboards that leverage your Rhino information. So Semantic is a toolkit that was really born out of a set of engagements that we've had in the past as consultants at Proving Ground, where we had this need to create simple data interfaces for objects in Rhino. So the ability to kind of click on an object, assign it some data, and use that data to extract some information. A lot of these workflows are available through tools like Grasshopper and things of that nature. But given the nature of a lot of our work, we needed kind of a more standalone interface that didn't require computational knowledge or coding know-how to achieve. We wanted something that could be readily deployed to a group of users. And so we've kind of built up Semantic and are really looking to position Rhino as this flexible data source. So as you author geometry with data in Rhino, we're able to capture those properties within the 3DM file and then use the 3DM file as a data source in other environments like Revit, for example. We did a conveyor workshop last week. And then we also are doing quite a bit of work with Power BI, which is a business intelligence solution that lets you build up dashboards and cross-reference data across many different data sources. Very powerful stuff. So when I look at Semantic, one of the things that we'll be doing in this workshop is building up a parameter set, a property set that can exist on top of your Rhino objects using conventional modeling interfaces and techniques. So the idea being that if you're a designer and you've created a set of surfaces, solids, blocks, and what have you, you should be able to create a property set that can bind to those objects and then be scheduled and reported those, from those objects. So we have a property editor and interface for this. And the way that kind of plays out in 3D is that you're able to click into an object and get an understanding of what that object is. You're able to kind of see object level properties. Here I have a panel that's selected and I can see, the type of panel that it is, what orientation it's at. These are, property sets that, I built up for this specific example. There's fun widgets like drop downs and date indicators. There are sliders and things like that that are built into this. But overall, it's about this idea of assigning data to your objects. And what this allows us to do is also create the ability to report data out of your objects inside of Rhino as well. So the idea that you're able to not only click on an object and find out what it is, but we can use our object property sets to derive tabular reports within the Rhino environment that update as you change your geometry and change different selections. This is conceptually kind of like a lightweight version of schedules in Revit, if you've worked within the kind of building information modeling context. Sort of an ulterior motive for this is that we wanted, we still to this day are working with architects and designers, and people love running that area command on surfaces. And the idea that your people are still doing manual takeoffs of properties when they're in kind of that conceptual design phase is still pretty prevalent. And so what Semantic does is it allows users to quickly get to the data that they're interested in and have these types of just live reports that can work with the Rhino objects. that lends itself to a number of different, kind of fun scenarios. For example, if you combine our Semantic toolkit with one of our heads-up display open source toolkits called Conduit, you can start to see that as you start to change property selections, you might be able to have a real-time heads-up display tied into Grasshopper, for example. So while Semantic is kind of independent of Grasshopper, we do provide these kinds of integrations with other toolkits that would allow you to really extend your workflow if you are in that computational design space. One aspect of our Semantic product that we've put out online that a number of people have expressed great interest in is the idea of using Rhino in a business intelligence context. So here is a kind of a diagram that explains this, where you have Rhino models with data. We've created a custom Rhino visual that will let you read in the Rhino objects and have that geometry presented in Power BI, and then that visual can interact with other visuals on your Power BI dashboard. So the combination of Rhino geometry, the model anything attitude that Rhino promotes, with the idea that you can have flexible data structures using a tool like Semantic, then lends itself to creating presentations with that information. And so this is Power BI. It's a business intelligence tool created by Microsoft. Microsoft's tools do have a theme of using the term power in front of everything. So you have PowerPoint, Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate, and so on. A lot of power. But we like Power BI because it really is a it's a really easy tool to get into. It's not very intimidating as a product. You can drag and drop visuals onto a dashboard. And then with our Rhino 3D visual, we wanted to make it so you could render Rhino models in a very kind of similar and intuitive way. Click on your Rhino model, drag your fields, and you have now a three-dimensional visual, which opens up a lot of possibilities when it comes to what we can create with this. So this was a dashboard I put together ahead of this workshop that uses a Rhino model that had a series of planning options in an urban context. Options 1 through 4. Each of these options has different cost parameters, revenue parameters, area parameters, and so on. And we wanted to have a dashboard that presented that information. So if you've kind of created a Rhino model and you want to kind of show your client, hey, here are 3 options of what you can do on the site. Here's how they compare. Here's how they differ. You're able to set up these types of presentable scenarios in a dashboard context. And not only that, have a digital asset that you can send to your client through the web and publish these reports on the cloud. So, your colleagues can interact with these models and kind of understand the trade-offs without having to open up Rhino at all. It's just kind of all kind of composed and integrated in this dashboard. So this workshop is really going to step through that trajectory. We're going to start off by building up a property set inside of the Rhino environment using Semantic. We're going to export data out of Rhino. We're then going to go into Power BI and build up a dashboard and publish it to the cloud. And we're going to do it in about 40 minutes and some change. A couple of things to note. Power BI, if you haven't looked at it, if you have the Microsoft Office suite, like Office 365, you get Power BI for free. It's there's like a kind of a baseline entry version. Power BI Pro has like a subscription per month, and there's like enterprise reporting servers that you can integrate that are more expensive than that, of course. But it's a very affordable toolkit if you haven't touched it before. Very accessible. Think about Microsoft product licensing essentially. But yeah, it's very easy to set up a free account and start using it. It's becoming really popular. We're seeing in different corners of the building design and construction industry. So I'm going to start in Rhino, And what I have here is I have a block massing design. I have a semantic window open. There's not much going on here in terms of layers. I just have this sort of on a design mass. If I toggle on floors, you can see I've derived these kind of slices of the mass kind of representing floor surfaces. If you're opening Semantic for the first time and you're in Rhino, you can simply type in the command line Semantic panel. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up the Semantic property manager. So picking up on that thread, so I've got now a Semantic panel that's been kind of activated. This is a property editor. And what we wanted to do is really have this positioned alongside the other Rhino properties that we're seeing here, relative to like, if you click on an object, right, you're going to see, the layer it's on, the display color, print width, there's a number of different properties that one can edit here, materials and so on. Semantic is positioned as a generalized, kind of metadata or additional property editing environment. And it is not so unlike if you were to go into a tool like a building information modeling tool like Revit and you clicked on an object and you would see all of its sort of parameters and object properties listed. We wanted to have something like that for Rhino, but something that was, obviously more lightweight and flexible than what's found in the kind of BIM world, because this could be used for a number of different scenarios. So right now, if I click on these objects, you'll see that there are no kind of properties in this document. We actually need to define our own property sets and understand like what we're actually hoping to capture out of a model like this. And so there is at the bottom of the screen what's called a property group manager. And the property group manager allows users to define groupings of properties that can be assigned to different objects. So you might have a grouping of properties that go towards your sort of floor plates, or you might have a grouping of properties that go to your facade panels. Or, maybe you're making something not even in architecture at all, and it's sort of more manufacturing driven, might have property groups that are assigned to some specialized components there. So it's pretty flexible when it comes to this. And we've used this tool both in an architectural design context as well as a kind of manufacturing estimating workflow context as well. So when I'm here, one of the things that you'll notice that there are some internal properties that I can assign to an object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right click and select my floors that are being modeled here, and I'm going to assign them to these internal properties. And what this is going to do is it's going to activate in Semantic these object property lists for area and length. These are like, typically what you would do is if you wanted to find out the area of the surface, you could, type in the area command to get the area, or you could go to, your property editor and look up the attributes of that surface. Or you might have a Grasshopper script that just, grabs everything and computes the area. But what we've done here is with Semantic, we've assigned these to the internal properties, which means that if I click through these objects, I'm getting area, if it's a surface, length, if it's a curve. If I click on these on a variety of different objects, you can see that it's, reporting, the aggregation of that area across 5 objects. So those are some internal calculations that it's doing. But then I can start to build up a property set that's separate from those. And so we can see under the property groups, I can say, okay, I want to add a new property group. And I can either add it at the object level or the document level. And the document level will expose properties that exist globally. So if you wanted to provide information in your Rhino document about object name, number, and things like that, you can, or your project name, number, maybe the date, global properties like cost multipliers, those can be edited there. Object properties exist on the object itself. And you can see that when we go into this property group editor, we can create a name for our group. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call this the planning program. And now that I have my property group, I can now start to describe a set of properties. And I have a choice of what type of property to create. I can create a text property, a numeric property, a categorical property, Boolean, so 1 or 0, or a date property. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off with a numeric property, and I'm going to call this cost per square foot. So that could be cost per square area or what have you. And what I can do here is start to format this data to say like, okay, well, I want this to be formatted as a kind of an actual cost value, and I'll enter that in. So now that's going to be a property that will exist on my objects. I'm then going to also add in a couple of category properties. Categories expose drop-down menus in the semantic interface. So if you wanted to say like, okay, I want to distinguish between building A, B, and C, or departments for office, retail, residential, hotel, I can start to define that type of property set here with some selectable attributes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this the building, and I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to now kind of give my buildings a couple of options. So I'm going to call this building A. You kind of see I have like 3 parcels here, A, B, and C. So I'm going to create kind of 3 classifications here. So delete you for a minute. So I'm going to call this building B and building C, like so. So 3 options. I can also kind of change the color designation for these. So maybe building A is kind of more gold. Building B, I can make maybe this violet color. Building C, I'll make this, let's see, maybe more of a light green. So now I have like 3 color designations there. I'll hit save. And I'm going to do another set of categories for the kind of program designation. So I'm going to say, okay, this is going to be program. I'm going to say I need a selector for office. I need a selector for residential, maybe retail and hotel. And of course I can go in and start to edit the colors for these as well. Maybe there'll be a separate set of colors. I'll maybe choose a chartreuse for office, maybe a blue for the residential, retail. Maybe I'll give this lavender, and hotel. I don't know, what's a good color? Maybe, ooh, so many colors in the rainbow. Salmon, that's good. So office, residential, hotel, and retail. I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to save my property group. So now I have 3 properties that I can kind of start to assign to my objects here. And when I have those created, you can see that I have this now property group for a planning program. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my floors again, select objects, and I'm going to assign them to that property group. And now what you'll see in Semantic is that there are these properties created here that I can now start to edit and select from. And we'll go through that exercise in a second. One of the things I like to point out, though, while we're in the property groups editor, is that you do have the ability to, after you create one of these property groups, and say you want to reuse this type of property set in other models, you can export a property set as a, what we call it, a semantic class data file. And what this will let you do is like, hey, I'm going to set up this template of properties I know I want to reuse. I have a couple of these for myself for a lot of the 3D printing that I do. I'll use Semantic to classify objects and understand 3D printing parts and materials and print times and things like that. So I have a couple of my own sort of personal standard ones. But this allows you to start to reuse this and use it in different contexts if you put the work into building a template, for example. But now that I have these properties assigned, I'm gonna go ahead and hit close, and I'm gonna go in and now start using these properties and editing my selections here. So the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna go ahead and isolate these objects, and I'm gonna go through an exercise of classifying them. So this first building here, I'm going to go ahead and select, window select, and I'm going to say, okay, that's going to be building A. This one here is going to be building B. So I'm going to make sure that ends up as building B. So if I click on this floor surface, you see that's B, that's A. And if I click on this one here, I'm going to call this building C. So we now have like, some difference in data here. What you'll see is that under internal properties at the document level, everything is being previewed by the layer style. So everything is kind of layer color based. If I go down to building, what that's going to do is it's going to match the color of my objects to the building property that it's assigned to. So you can see that it's building A has this kind of orange color, magenta, and green. Those are now being overridden in the viewport, so I can kind of see what's what in terms of that selection. This will also work as we start to assign the different program attributes here. So maybe on this top part of the tower, I want this to not be an office, but I want it to be a hotel. This now has some hotel attributes. So if I go to this preview tab and go down to program, what we're going to see is that hotel is now being rendered as the selected color for that object. And if I go down to this lower tier, maybe I want this to be like a residential component. So those will be overwritten as blue. Maybe the first floor on each of these buildings, these building concepts are going to be like retail at the base, right? And maybe I want this smaller building here to be all office, so that's already green. These are already green. Maybe I want this whole thing to be a retail complex as well. So I'm basically toggling and shifting around the different designations using these semantic properties. And now I can go in and say, okay, show me everything by building, show me by the layer color, show me by program. So we've kind of got this extra layer of information now that is existing on top of these objects. So what's interesting now is that these are computing areas, and we have these designations. We also have this field here for cost per square foot. So maybe if I select all of these here, I'm going to give these a designation of like 200 to start. So $200 per square foot. And we may even like want to vary these up. Maybe the residential here is going to be more expensive. If I want those to be higher end, maybe I'll say that the office pieces are going to be less expensive. And so one trick that I like to point out when it comes to these properties is if I say, okay, let's say I want to select based on similar properties. If I right click on the program level here, I can say select similar, and that's going to grab all of my objects that are on that program level. And I'm going to bring these down to maybe 180, for example. So now I have kind of a variety of different costing, some cost data, a variety of different building designations, a variety of different program designations here. So what I can now start to do is build up a schedule. Let's say I want to have some reporting on these attributes as I model and as I start to stretch and shape the building or add different components. Well, we have a report manager in Semantic, which allows us to derive kind of like schedules or tabular data about some of these different properties. So what I can do here is say, okay, I want to add a new report. I'm going to call this, I'll call it area by building, for example. And what I can do here is I have dimensions and I have measures. These are kind of taken from different report generating tools like Power BI or Tableau. A dimension is a kind of a qualitative field that will help me group together objects. So if I wanted to say like, okay, I want to produce a schedule that shows me area by building, I would use the building designation as a dimension, and then I would use the measure to be the mathematical representation of that area. So here I'm just going to simply go, okay, I want to make this the building layer, and I'll give it a heading as well. It'll match the property. This field name up here can be different than the property it's selected if you need to override it, for example. And then under the measure field, I'm going to have an expression for area. And area, and maybe I'll even give this a little bit of a different look there for the property. So the expression is simply area, and the field name is area square foot. I'm just going to go ahead and save that. And now we have this report that if I activate, we are now getting a tabular representation of this project, building A, B, and C, and the area for each one, right? So if I start to edit this in any way, and I say, okay, well, maybe I want this to actually be considered to be a part of building building A, if I go in and say, make that building A, that report is now going to update the area that goes from these surfaces is now going to be allocated to the building A classification. And I can change that back, which is going to add in that field. It also responds to like edits to the geometry. So if I squish this thing a little bit, you can see that building B's area is now less than it was if I unsquish it, right? So there's this kind of event tracking that's occurring as you're, doing manual modeling operations and seeing the kind of resultant calculations there. If I go back into my property manager, go ahead and close this report. I can do a similar one that maybe looks at maybe cost by department. So I'm going to create another schedule, or maybe I'll call it cost by program to be consistent. So you can see I've got this program category there. I'm going to say cost by program, and I'm going to say, okay, well, my property is going to be the program property. I'll just kind of replicate the name up there for the field name. And then I'm going to create a new measure. And this measure is going to be the total cost. And in this case, I'm going to use an expression to basically multiply area by the cost per square foot property. So the way that I'm going to do that is I can see my properties over here. I'm going to do open bracket, cost per SF, close, and then I'm going to multiply it by my area value. And I'm using those brackets to kind of call out that those are properties that are available in Semantic. And I'm going to make sure that the formatting for these is also going to be dollars, so I can get an idea of the total cost by department. And I'll go ahead and save that. And then if I activate it, you can see I now have a report that shows hotel, office, residential, and retail, and their calculated costs, basically taking the designation of cost per square foot by the area. And so I can go in and start to now edit this. Maybe I want the lower half of this thing that's designated as residential to instead now be office. So this is now shifting the numeric calculation of costs by department here. I can jump in and also start to, maybe I'll change this up. Maybe I want this to be residential here. And so I'll change that to be residential. So, shifting areas around, we're seeing that kind of report come through. So that's the kind of basics of, I guess, property assignment in the Rhino environment. The idea being that this becomes a lightweight editor for changing object properties and attributes. You can build up some rather lengthy property selections. And maybe what I'll do is jump over to this other model that I have set up here, which is also in Rhino. It's kind of more developed version. What I've done here is you can see that if I select one of these objects, I have, program name, cost per square foot, department, building type. You can see that there's a kind of a revenue estimate, per square foot, like a target. And there's also this design option property. And so the way that this model is structured is I have under my layers this kind of building designation as option 1, for example. But if I activate the layer for option 2 and then highlight, hide option 1, it can really start to have, we see this happen a lot with Rhino models and conceptual modeling, is you might have this kind of layer structure representing different schemes or options. This type of interface complements that in a way where I can now start to activate different layers here. I think at this point, I'm going to maybe we can run through some questions, Steve, before we jump into the Power BI section.
Sure. So regarding these floor plates, there's a question about subsurfaces, circulation, or a floor plate that is office and residential and sort of broken up by floor rather than, or sort of within the floor.
Sure.
Do you have to kind of break the plane and assign the property separately? How can you achieve that?
Sure. So there's two ways I think that one could go about it. I think the most direct way is to say like, okay, well, I have this, like, for example, this one here is maybe a good example. You can kind of see that there is a surface kind of right underneath the tower form, and then one that is right above the sort of podium level here. I could have this podium, for example, be broken up by, have a different, maybe this is retail designation, right? So splitting of surfaces in this way, if you want like really exact measurements and things like that, that could be one way of doing it. The other way of doing it would be to sort of say like, okay, well, maybe we assume that every floor has several different programs. And so you have different properties representing the different programs. And maybe you then have a property that controls the ratio between those two programs. So there's, a couple of different, I think, ways of doing it. I think the most direct way would be to say like, okay, well, if I have a more granular breakdown of space in a model like this, then you can, start to slice things up by that component. It really comes down to your workflow. I think you can add any number of properties you want, and you can start to structure your work in a manner that just sort of suits the problem.
There's another question. So thinking about the context of these buildings you have sort of in gray.
Yep.
Can you apply data to those pieces of geometry? And can you even sort of, is there an automated way to sort of assign the date one of those buildings was built and the cost or the area?
Yeah. So, that's an interesting thing to explore here. So maybe what I'll do is say, okay, we have this build out of information. This is like the the planning program data set. But let's say I want to look at kind of a massing structure like this, and I have these other masses here. Maybe what I want to do is then say, well, I'm going to create another property group. I'm going to call this the maybe the urban context property set, right? And maybe here, what I can then start to say is, okay, I'm going to create a date property, and I'm going to say, date built, for example, and it'll expose this date property. And maybe what I also want to do is also create a category of, what type of building is this, like building type, and maybe there's one here where it's like, office. Maybe there's a museum in the context here. Maybe there's
things like building materials, architectural style.
Yeah, style. Well, that may be. So I'll start here.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I'll say, okay, I'm going to make this orange, and I'll make this museum one, chartreuse or something like that. So there's a couple of things there. I can save that. I can also then say, okay, well, maybe I want to have a couple of selectors for architectural style, or in fact, what I'll do is just to show text editing. I can call this one architectural style, and I can have some lookups, but I can also enter in any value that I want. Lookups refers to like as you enter in text into this property, the tool will remember previous entries and allow you to call them up. So I'll show you that here in a second. But now I have this like, okay, maybe this is my urban context property set, and I'll save that. And what I want to do is apply this to all of my massing. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of that. I'm going to go ahead and, maybe I'll deselect our current one here. Maybe I'll just focus on the context, but I'll assign the urban context attributes there. So now I have this ability to do a color override on, say, building type. So like everything right now is this orange, but maybe I know I have a museum that's like right here. So I'm going to go ahead and classify that. Maybe there's, something over here too as well. So you can start to assign those properties. And maybe there's dates built. So in this one, maybe I want to really catalog some of the historical context. Maybe this complex here wants to have a date assigned to it that's different than the others. So we've got like this date built. Maybe this one here has an architectural style as being modern. And over here, it's going to be classical, right? So you're kind of doing this property assignment. But then if I jump over here, you can see that because it's tracking previous entries, I can now choose from my running list of options. So yeah, you could do that as certainly as an approach here. And you can certainly have, so these objects don't contain the properties. So these objects have the urban context property. This one has no properties on it. And these floors have a property set for the building program, right? So you can really start to slice up your model in different ways, use different property sets for different purposes, and things like that. I did want to highlight before I moved on to Power BI is that there are some tools in Grasshopper if you're so interested in like automating property assignment or use properties selected in Rhino to drive some Grasshopper functionality, is that Semantic does include some Grasshopper components that let you bring data in. So for example, under Proving Ground tab, when you have it installed, there are, we've exposed a series of components here that let you read properties in from the model. You can read your semantic reports in, the tabular data that I was showing, you can read those in. You can read in your categories and property values on specific objects. But that's, a whole other tutorial set. We do have some videos covering that information.
So with, you kind of just touched on tabular data. There's a question about assigning property from external sources like OpenStreetMaps. Or if someone has a list of attributes for these buildings, is it possible to assign keys to each of these buildings and automatically sort of assign properties from a CSV file?
I'm glad. That's a great entry point into the Power BI conversation.
Cool.
So what I'm going to do is kind of jump over to that, because I think when we start to look at understand how data can be keyed into other attributes, I think that will become pretty clear as we go down the workflow into Power BI. So for those of you who are not as familiar, Power BI is a program authored by Microsoft that lets you build up reports tied into data. And what you can do in kind of more conventional out of the box sense is say, hey, I want to make a dashboard that takes my Excel spreadsheet or database information and allows me to generate pie charts, bar charts, column charts. There's information about, you can, find a map if you have some GIS data that you're trying to bring in, and you can basically build up a design. So this is an example of a report that I built out for this workshop, and I also provided in a data set that I'll be allowing everyone to download. But it has a Rhino model that has a series of design options in the urban context here. I am able to create these bar charts and so on, and all of this stuff is interactive, which is really cool. What we're going to see as we start to build one up is that if I click on option 3 here, my visuals for the Rhino model will update and highlight option 3. So there's an understanding in Power BI with how these different widgets interact with each other. Or if I want to say, show me the hotel across these options, what does that look like? So what I'm going to do as a basis of demonstration is show how I built up this dashboard. And also keeping in mind that if you have other data sources, so right now I'm referencing a Rhino model and some data, you might have information coming from 2, 3, 4, 15, 20 different data sources that you're referencing into a single report. And you can create within the Power BI editor a join between one data source and another. And you can join it based on like an object ID. You can join it based on like a property that you're looking for. It's very, very open-ended. And you're able to do it through like this kind of graphical editing mode, which is, can make it pretty intuitive. But I thought what I might do is kind of go through that study here of how does one build up a report. And so this is what Power BI looks like when you first open it up. You have a ribbon window that lets you do some connections into data sources. You can edit global styling and things like that. You have a visualizations tab. This is where you're selecting your visual and the different things that you want to look for. Like if I want to like summarize my area by a pie chart, or look at occupancy levels by a bar chart, or if I want to look at 3D print run times, I can maybe use a line chart to show that. There's like all sorts of different data, or like you're gathering sensors and you're wanting to show trending on some matter. You can really build up a rather robust report here. And those visuals are controlled by fields that exist in your data set. So what I want to do is I want to create a data set that represents the information that's stored within one of these Rhino files. And that's really where our report manager comes in. So I have this file. I'm going to provide this as a data set for everyone. So what you can do is under Semantic reports, you can see that I have a couple of fields here: cost by department, area by building. I've showed that workflow in my earlier example. You can also generate itemized object data. So to give you an idea of how this report is built up, what you'll see is that I have grabbed from all of my surfaces here, the department, a building property, a cost per square foot property, an area property, the design option property, and a revenue property. I'm also doing some calculations on total cost per object, as well as a total revenue calculation. So those are all being derived within this report builder. And you'll see that I have this option selected up here that says output individual Rhino objects. So what this allows me to do is when I activate my schedule or my report with itemized project data, is that I'm getting the unique identifier for every Rhino object and what its property set is. And what I can do is choose to export this as a JSON, a CSV, or an Excel file. I'm going to use an Excel file, and I'm going to go ahead and hit export, and it's going to prompt me to save this Excel file. You can see I've already saved it here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save on this object. It's basically going to overwrite that Excel file. It's basically producing an Excel file with this tabular information. Excuse me. So if I go back into Power BI, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a data source to that information. So I'm going to go under Power BI. You'll see that under the data tab, there is an option to attach to Excel, which is what I want, but I can also attach to a bunch of different other data sources. Maybe what I'll do is just open this up here to kind of show you where you might be able to pull data from. So Excel is a really popular one. It's kind of a standalone environment. You can kind of work on everything locally, but I can connect into MySQL databases. I can connect into SQL Server databases. I can connect into a GIS database if that's available. If I wanted to hook into a website that has a table on the page, I can do that. There's Google Analytics connections, all sorts of different stuff that you can bring in here. In this case, I'm going to start simple and just do an Excel connection. So with the Excel connection, I'm going to find my itemized object data. I'm going to hit open. And this is going to bring in my information and present the various worksheets that are available here. So I only have one worksheet, and you can see that should look pretty familiar. It's coming right out of the Semantic Rhino model. It's giving me my property sets. And I'm going to go ahead and hit load. And what this is going to do is it's going to load the data into my Power BI report and provide me now with the fields that I can select from and use to drive some of my visuals. So what this is doing here is it's loading in 514 rows of data, which is a pretty small amount of data. Power BI can handle, we deal with data sets in the millions of rows. often with Revit and other external data sources. But here you can see I have now fields that I can activate and use for the driving of visuals. So what I'm going to do here is, like under the visualizations tab, I'm going to activate a stacked bar chart. And that's just going to place an instance of this empty bar chart in my scene. And with this visual selected, I can now start to feed in information that will let me build up what that visual looks like. So for example, if I want to see, hey, show me my square area by design option. So I'm going to pull in area into values, and this is going to create basically a calculation of all area in my model, which isn't exactly what I want. So this is like capturing all area from across 4 design options. But if I want to slice it up and say, well, show me now my options as the axis, this is now slicing up that chart and showing me options 1 through 4 and the square area for each one. And I can do all sorts of fun stuff to like style this if I want. I can make the data labels active, so it's showing me area there. I can change the colors of these objects. And I can also have this impact other visuals. So automatically in Power BI, because I'm drawing from the same data set, maybe I want an adjacent pie chart that shows me the area, or maybe it shows me the cost. I'm going to do total cost by design option. So I'm going to do cost as my value and design option as my legend. So if I now pick on one of these objects, this is design option 3, this is going to highlight that adjacent information in one of my other visuals. Okay. So this type of interaction is the basis for how we then introduce 3D into this environment. We wanted to have a visual that treats 3-dimensional geometry the same way that Power BI treats other types of data representation. And in effect, geometry is just another data source. So with Semantic, we've included a 3D visual for Rhino files. And the way to get to that is we have these standard visualizations. There are visualizations that you can find online through the Microsoft Store. There's also the ability to import visuals from other files. So what I'm going to do is import the Rhino visual from an external file and go to the, I'm going to go to my documents. When it's first installed, you can go to the Proving Ground folder, and then under Semantic, you'll have the Rhino visual. And if you have a trial visual will be installed that has like a demo watermark on it. And if you purchase the full version, you have the unencumbered version here that you can test. But the trial one makes it, is fully featured. It it just produces things that you may not want in your dashboard because it has our information on it. The license stuff does not. So I'm going to go ahead and activate the Rhino Power BI visual. And it'll say, okay, I'm going to import the custom visual. And now I have a new visual available in the visualizations tab. And what I can do here is say, just like I did with these pie charts and bar charts, is say, okay, well now give me my Rhino visual. And that's going to activate a new window that's going to allow me to attach to a Rhino model. So it's going to say, okay, upload a model and set at least one data field. I'm going to go ahead and go to upload, and I'm going to navigate to where I have that 3D model stored that has my information about design options and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and go to, let's see if I have it here. Okay, navigate into my folders here. I think it's this model. Yes. So it's going to load that in. And the thing I need to do at this point is now set up some data fields. So one thing that's going to be important to kind of align the 3D model with this area information is to attach the object IDs in. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in my object IDs here. And what this is going to do is it's going to activate my model. And what you'll see is it's kind of a mashup at the moment. I have 4 different design options all coexisting on top of each other because I haven't told the visual how to slice up my model. And so in this case, I'm going to use option as a slicing, basically a way to parse out that information. And so I'm going to pull option into this view field. And what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, it's going to reach in and now it's going to generate 4 different views for those 4 different design options because we have 4 options here and so on. So it can kind of use the view, like if I wanted to do this with something different, let's say I wanted to do it by department, which really isn't applicable in this case, but maybe to demonstrate this, I have 6 different departments, and what it's doing is it's isolating the geometry for each of the departments across all 4 options in these separate views. So it's really how that these visualization options is all about how you want to slice up your 3D data. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to option here. What I also want to do now is maybe give this some color and some style. So everything right now is being colored gray. Maybe I want to color everything by building. So I'm going to drag the building field in. And right now it's now going to auto-assign 3 different colors to those 3 different buildings. If I wanted to see it by department, I want to use the department as the category. Now it's kind of allocating and assigning colors based on the department allocation. So we now have this like kind of buildup of information here. There's all sorts of different overrides that you can have on a visual like this. So if I want to jump in and go to, there's this styling tab, format tab for any visual. If I want to say, well, I want to not show the upload button, so I want to get rid of that. I want to see rendering style that is based on orthographic. So it's going to be a parallel view, for example. And maybe I want this to be flat shaded, so no shadows. Or maybe I want it to be soft shaded with some softer shadows, which will give me a different kind of look as well. So I'm going to keep it at maybe a flat shaded mode here for now. I can also go in and start to say like, okay, well, maybe I want the context to be ghosted. So anything that doesn't have a semantic property will kind of ghost to the background, and everything that has like a value assigned to it will kind of come to the forefront. I can also override data colors here. So Power BI auto-assign these. If I wanted to change the green space to be a proper green value, I can do that, for example. Maybe I want the circulation to be more of a gray color. So you have this kind of ability to really format your presentation here. And the thing I wanted to kind of, I guess, end on with this particular demonstration is that you can really start to spend some time and attention to really building up this type of dashboard. And what I want to do here is publish the dashboard to the cloud. So everything that you build inside of Power BI has this ability to be pushed to the cloud so it can be web viewable. And the way that you do that is you can say, okay, now I've built up my 3D dashboard. I have these different selection sets that I can use to filter my views. I've got this looking the way I want. I can do a publish to my own workspace. And this is going to take this dashboard and put it in the cloud. So first thing you need to do is you have to obviously save it. So I'm going to call this the workshop demo. Hit save. And it's going to then connect into my Power BI account on the cloud. It's kind of packaging everything up. And there will be a notification here on what workspace I want to connect it to here eventually. But while I'm working through this, does anyone want to, maybe we can take a look at some questions here.
Sure. You may have already touched on this, but just want to make sure it gets answered. Is there a way to reference existing Rhino attribute values that have already been assigned to geometry?
How do you mean? Reference existing Rhino attributes value have already assigned to geometry, like stuff that is non-semantic?
I'm guessing so. This is Nicholas's question. If you can add some more detail in the chat, we can respond to that.
Sure. So, I mean, if I'm guessing, what I'm guessing is happening is that there's my workspace, select that, let that go through the process. What I'm guessing is that he's asking, if you've already got a bunch of metadata on objects, maybe using Grasshopper, there's tools like Elephant and other kind of data management tools in Grasshopper. If you've got these object properties, the answer to that is yes. Because what you can do is if you're able to create an itemized list of objects by Rhino GUID or a unique identifier that attaches to a Rhino model, then that can be used as a valid way to interact with things on this slicer within the context of Power BI fields and data attributes. We have seen that done a bit.
Great. And so you just demonstrated a way to add external data sources to match those to the object ID, the Rhino GUID. In Power BI, I think there are some questions about doing that on the Rhino side with Grasshopper. It seems like you could manually add keys to some of those buildings, for example, create a Grasshopper script to then pull in other data sources like your built architectural style and then reassign those back into those buildings once you've keyed in each of those pieces of geometry. Does that seem like the right workflow there using Grasshopper and external data?
Absolutely. So the Grasshopper, if you're familiar with Grasshopper, you know how to use Grasshopper. If you're able to key your data in that way and then auto assign to an available property in the semantic panel, then yes, that is definitely a use case. And we do have some documentation on those workflows. So to highlight where you can get Semantic, this is the apps.provingground.io site. There's Semantic there. We do have a documentation resource for Semantic that would let you to say, okay, here's my Semantic documentation. Here is read a property query into Grasshopper. So this shows you how to instantiate and bring your properties into Grasshopper that may be already in Semantic. There's also a change a property value from Grasshopper. So there are components here. Here's, for example, an example where you have a numeric object that needs some values coming from Grasshopper. You're able to open Grasshopper up, reference those objects, line up your data, and then change the values automatically from Grasshopper as well. The upload did complete. So here is the cloud version of that dashboard. So this is in the browser. So all of the three-dimensional visuals are there. If I wanted to share this report with someone else, I could email email someone to give access to the report. I could also publish to the web publicly, which would then create an embed code, wherein I can then set up, send someone a link to this Power BI dashboard on, on a forum, or I think I've posted a few of these on Twitter, for example. If you're not using confidential data, I'm doing these demos, that works quite well. But this is the same kind of experience now rendered in the browser context. So in this workshop, we've successfully gone from, hey, building up a property set in Rhino, linking it up into a Power BI report, and publishing it to the web.
One thing there is when you do publish, the dashboard is completely public.
Yep.
Unless you have a pro license, which then you need a pro license to also view the dashboard privately.
That's not the case anymore, I believe. You can actually share with an external party now. I believe. I think I looked that up recently, and it does look like you can invite people in as a viewer, but not an editor.
And Nate, where do you have our example Semantic Power BI dashboards linked? Is that on the apps page?
Yeah, so what I'll be doing is following this recording, I'll be sending everyone a link to the files that were curated here. The invite reminder for this workshop should have also included a link to these examples. If you go to our Semantic documentation, we've also published a series of dashboard examples here that you can navigate through and parse through and kind of understand different attributes. So this model should look familiar. We kind of showed this and linking it in. This report sample has some pretty fun stuff in it in terms of organizing multiple tabs and links between different objects. So I'll let this kind of open up. So this actually has 3 tabs. This is a Power BI visual for a map viewer. So kind of showing the object, the location of a hypothetical project. Here's some massing information rendered. If I go to a planning and programming report, it'll jump me to another tab and show me the type of floor plate programming style that I've been showing. And then there's also a object quantities report. And sorry, my voice is starting to go. I actually came down with a cold last night. So thanks for putting up with my squeaky, raspy voice today. But yeah, what we've tried to do is provide a number of different examples that you can refer to in terms of how can Semantic be used, how can Rhino be used with Power BI, and then how can you really start to share and distribute these dashboards. And again, one of our operating philosophies with this is that we really want to create tools that are accessible. They don't require knowledge of coding or computation to really run. I personally think it's super exciting that someone can go from a manually modeled Rhino model with some understanding of object assignment into a web viewable 3D dashboard without having to write a single line of HTML. That wasn't possible before. And I think that level, like the idea of lowering barrier to entry and creating these workflows that let people take advantage of their data is there's ample opportunity out there for it.
One last bonus question, Nate, while we're still got some folks on, can you touch on Semantic and its connection with Conveyor and Revit?
Oh, sure. So if you assign properties to say, for example, I'll close out some of this stuff. Okay, here we go. So I have these, for example, if I have these properties assigned to an object in Rhino using Semantic, so I have this program name, cost, all these values assigned to it. If I wanted to use Conveyor, so Conveyor is our Rhino to Revit connection. If I were to say, okay, I want to bring this over into Revit as a floor plate, a proper floor plate, Conveyor will pick up on these semantic properties and create shared parameters on the object in Revit. So there's a bit of data continuity there. So the data will follow the object into the Revit world if you do an import, for example. I think, is there anything else? We're about 10 minutes.
I think we've covered everything.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time. I hope this was valuable context and information. Feel free to check out Semantic on our site. There's a trial available. A lot of documentation resources. Take one of our dashboards for a spin, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to hear how you're using Semantic and this toolkit. Every now and then a client will share a dashboard with us and we get really excited about it. So yeah, feel free to connect with us. And if you have any issues with the software, please let us know as well. We'll try to resolve it. So thank you.